Day two continues, and you've been following the live panels, the fireside chats. All of this material will be available on the different Poets and Quants channels, YouTube, Facebook, and of course the site itself. So if you had a job to go to or other things to do, or it was just late night, wherever you are, do come back. There's just a wealth of material. We've placed a real focus on personal development as part of this MBA journey. And ahead of this panel, I went onto the websites of the schools of my three guests and just found a handful of comments that I wanted to share. I'm not going to ascribe them to any school. We'll be able to work that out as we go. But I think that they speak volumes about how far beyond the obvious financial returns, the career opportunities that the MBA opens up for you. So here they are. Reveal the best person you can be. I love that one. You're a unique individual with gifts that can benefit both business and society. The idea of taking a deep dive into your future and discovering what drives you, because business school is a great place to grow. And finally, learning when you least expect it. That struck me. And the idea that we share success. So let me introduce my guests. It's lovely to welcome Gary Fraser. Gary is the Associate Dean of the MBA program at UCLA Anderson. His career has taken him from the East and the West Coasts, and he's even worked on the marketing of British chocolate. You can imagine, viewers, how close that is to my heart. During his undergrad studies in Queensland, Craig Crossland came across some of that chocolate. He then went on to get his MBA in Ireland. And here he is now as the Senior Associate Dean for Academic Programs at the Mendoza College of Business at Notre Dame. He's also a Professor of Management and Organization and a friend of Center Court, Rebecca Cook. Rebecca herself, an MBA from the Kelley School at Indiana, and she has helped undergrads, MBAs, both in presence and online. She's the Executive Director of Kelley Career Services. So we've got tremendous breadth in the panel. Thank you, all three of you, for being with us. Gary, I've placed this emphasis on the personal skills because, Anderson, all of those business skills that your students polish and develop, but there are these many areas of personal development. So what do you learn about yourself during the 2 years of the MBA?
Yeah, thank you. And thanks for having us, Matt. This is a great topic. I was excited when I was told that I can participate in this because today's MBA, there's so much press written about the costs and the challenges of maybe going, whether it's full-time or in any other format. And I think today's generation of MBAs are thinking about getting MBA, are thinking very transactionally. I get this degree, I pay a certain amount, I maybe give up my job if I'm going full time, and I get this job when I graduate. And does it pay out? And I think there's so many intangibles that an MBA experience can deliver that many times aren't captured, and that's because everyone's journey is individual and independent based on the quotes you were saying earlier. So, at Anderson, one of the things we focus on is this kind of full development, and all of our students from day one start doing different sorts of assessments. One thing is we have students study intercultural competence, and so what do I know about those that are different than me? Because we're bringing in students from all over the world, and we have dialogue where people talk about how they identify and what matters to them, which identities maybe they don't think about often, and which ones will impact their lives the most, or which ones are difficult to talk about. So they can start to build a sense of community with each other and learn from each other. But one of the other things we start from week one in orientation is a concept we call SALT, which stands for Self-Awareness, Leadership Development, and Team Dynamics. The core of that first year experience at Anderson is around the learning team, which is typically 5 or 6 members, that is intentionally diverse in terms of gender identity, nationality, race, ethnicity, and all these different dimensions. And we want that learning team to experience a couple of things. One, what is their leadership style now? Two, where do they want their leadership style to grow into? And three, how do I interact and motivate people that have different life experiences, that have different ways of identifying? And that's the core. And then it leads to things like first year club leadership roles, and then ultimately club leadership roles as the second year. So we start with the self-awareness because it's critical to understand where you can grow and where you want to grow. And then we also have some other terrific options that extend into leadership development more specifically for the 2 years that somebody's at Anderson.
Great. Well, Gary's got us off to a great start by sort of positioning this self-awareness. And Craig, that must be something that you witness both at the front of the classroom. You're an MBA yourself. Mendoza talks about revealing the best person you can be. Do you sort of, as you think about the students as they come in at the beginning and then as they graduate, do you really see that transition and the self-awareness that they're developing?
Yeah, absolutely. And thank you, Matt. Thank you for the opportunity to be part of this panel. It's a real privilege to be here. It might be worth just taking a minute or two to talk about my own MBA experience, because I think I'm in a position that maybe some of your listeners or some of those participating are in. My undergraduate degree was in physical therapy. I like to say I was such a good physical therapist, I'm now a management professor. And so it probably wasn't something that was going to be for me forever. I liked it. It was fine. I worked in Australia, I worked in Ireland, but it became clear I needed to change direction. And like many people before and since, when you want to change your career, when you want to change direction, when you want to springboard, the MBA is a wonderful way of doing that. I was exposed to a lot of things that I didn't know. I learned about finance, I learned about accountancy, I learned about the formal elements of marketing, the operations, a lot of stuff that I found very interesting, but that otherwise I wouldn't have seen. And so your question about the self-awareness, the self-confidence, I think that expresses it very well, because you feel lost a lot of the time if you're new to the MBA. I certainly felt lost. If you're doing one of the more intense programs in Europe, they tend to be 1 year rather than 2 years. So it does take you a little while to find your feet, but it gives you a lot of confidence that you can take what gets thrown at you. I think it also reflects an element of the MBA that you've only got a certain period of time. You've only got a year, 2 years. You can never be an expert in everything. But it gives you confidence in understanding that maybe you can manage those who are experts in certain areas, that you can go into managerial and leadership roles. I think the other thing that I consider about the MBA is it's the way that it's set up, that maybe it helps with self-awareness, certainly helps with self-confidence, is I sort of think of it as an onion metaphor. The heart, there's a series of technical skills that you'll learn. Overlaying that is a series of what I call behavioral skills, sometimes soft skills, but I'm trying to get rid of that word. But behavioral skills and communication and working with teams, and how you apply the technical skills. And then overlaid from that is under the zeitgeist, things like sustainability, artificial intelligence, things that are issues of importance. And the program is well designed to give you that grounding in technical skills, overlaid with behavioral skills, and then applied across these different areas of the zeitgeist that are important. I think all of that comes back to this idea that by the time you finish, you're a different person. To go back to your original question, I felt like a different person when I finished, and that stays with you for a while. Maybe the technical benefit sort of starts to fade over time, but the benefit of feeling like a different person, that continues there. I think I see that in our program. I see that in our students, and there's different benefits that everybody can gain.
Well, looking through the lens of careers, Rebecca, and Craig has given us a wonderful case study from the physical therapist to the management professor today. As students start to engage with Kelley, they've been admitted, perhaps even before they're showing up on the program. How do you then approach this idea of exploration? We don't all know at the age of 25 or even 35, where we might all find our real calling. So how do you break that down and help them to explore, their core strengths, passions, interests?
Mm-hmm. Sure. So at Kelley, we start actually well before they actually attend school. So roughly June, and they start in August. and with a pre-work, essentially about 30 or so hours of pre-work, really starting to think about who are they, the self-exploration. I mean, most people don't spend a lot of time exploring what they want to do or what they want to be unless they're forced to do so. Some people do, but most don't. They know they want to go to graduate school because they don't like something in their prior job, or they want to make that career shift. So really starting to think through that. What are your skills? What are your interests? What are your values? And then it's a lot of it is, again, self-reflection. Then we have a 2-week program called Me Inc. that is all run by the career services side at Kelley. And it's really, we break all of our class into small classrooms of about 15 or so people, and spend a lot of time delving into what they did on that pre-work, as well as exploring who are they some more. How do I begin to tell this story? Using Craig's example, how do I make that switch, right? Here's what I was to what I want to do next. And how do I begin to connect those dots to an employer, as I begin to explain that story and make it make sense. So beginning to test that process and really helping students understand this is what you're getting into. These are the skill sets you're going to learn. This is where you want to grow. We have them set goals and expectations for themselves of what they want to be when they graduate 2 years later. And to, as both Craig and Gary mentioned, I mean, the students change a lot. They may change their decision, and they may think they want to go into finance, but really want to go into marketing. But helping them through that exploration process. Also saying it's okay to fail, in the sense of it's okay to try things, test things. Maybe you like it, maybe you don't. I mean, that's partly what an internship is too. It's really exploring, is this really the right path I want to pursue? And if not, that's okay. And we'll come back and we'll reset. So we do spend a lot of time really delving into that, and hopefully then allowing that student to understand where they want to go right out of that MBA.
And is there a paradox sometimes, Rebecca, if they feel that they need to be demonstrating a level of confidence, or perhaps rather assertiveness? I'm very decided in where I want to head, and how you're then helping them to be not vulnerable, but very open-minded, and this idea of exploring.
Definitely, because I think they think everybody knows what they want to do, right? It's like they all come there for a specific purpose, and some do, but some of them just know they want to change. So we spend a lot of time thinking, like, what did you like about your last role? What are some pieces of it? Maybe you hated your last role, but there were pieces of it that you really liked. So how can we begin to look at that and say, what can you try? Also, I think that's why we press a lot on networking, the informational interviewing, to allow themselves to ask the questions. I always remind people, you're a student, you're allowed to ask questions. You're supposed to be learning. So ask and explore, and what do you really do? What does this job mean? What does that look like? And that is some vulnerability, because you don't really know, and you're not out there saying, this is exactly what I want to do. It is a little bit harder if you want to go into certain careers like an investment banking career, because you do have to learn that or know that early and really be much more assertive in that sense. But again, we're helping students make sure that that's the right path for them.
Right. Gary, I've often considered that my Zoom background screen, I might be better off with a Calvin and Hobbes cartoon where Calvin is shouting, I want to be the leader, I want to be the leader. And Hobbes is fine with that. So then he says, okay, now I'm the leader. What are we going to do? This idea of leadership that is indelibly associated with business school, it's not one course. I mean, again, take us through this journey and all of these different opportunities that are contributing to skills, experience, opportunities to then take on a leadership role.
I love that question, because you have a doctorate that I got from UPenn School of Education, and my dissertation was on leadership development in graduate business schools. And I looked at 3 schools and their models of leadership development. And ultimately, the big question is, can leadership be learned, or is it just innate? And explored all of that. And the reality of it is that there's this combination. You certainly learn about leadership styles, but ultimately it's through these experiences that help shape your leadership style that you want, that should be unique to you. And so one of the things we strive to do is follow a model that, that I studied when I was in my doctorate program, and that is there's certainly great academic approaches to leadership and learning about different leadership styles, and we augment that with great speakers that come to campus. But ultimately, there needs to be these experiences, and we start with that pretty much week 1 by assigning someone to their learning team. And in that learning team, they create a contract. And part of the contract talks about roles and responsibilities. And so certain weeks, someone takes the lead, but it's designed for everyone to take the lead. It's also designed for people to learn when to lead and when to follow, when to support the leader, because that's a critical component about leadership that a lot of people don't realize, is that there's this rush to prove that you can be a leader, but sometimes you need to take a step back and understand, how am I supporting the leader? And that all happens in this learning team experience. And there's also feedback. We also have resources where people can meet with a learning team if there's things that maybe go off the rails, and so they can use this as a learning, teachable experience. And so those learning team experiences, and they go through their whole core that way as students in these smaller groups of 5 or 6. And it creates an opportunity for them to then say, okay, this is what I've learned in my individual learning team, and this is where I can do it in different roles, whether it's a student government leadership position or a club position. But it is about not just getting these experiences, it's reflecting on those experiences. What went well, what didn't go well. And I think as long as those students are doing that, they are going to, Craig's point, substantially grow in that time, they're in business school.
And if we contrast that, Gary, to, well, I could have continued to work in my Fortune 500 company or my consulting firm for 2 years, and we'll have leadership opportunities. But I mean, you're accelerating and also varying the different angles that you're then looking at leadership, presumably.
Yeah, I think one of the things that people get the opportunity to do is to, figure out, how do I lead peers that see themselves on the same level as me? And also, by the way, we're taking these students that are in the top 10, 20% of their lives, not just their undergraduate or, their work experience, everything. They've been performers. And any organization typically has a top 10, 20, 30, 40, 50, and so forth. But now we're taking all those top people and putting them together and saying, well, how do you lead that group? And how do you motivate that group, particularly when they're not being compensated, right, to do these things? And I think if students learn that challenge, they will be much better tooled when they go back into whatever organization they want to go into, because it does come back to having a vision and motivating others to follow that vision. And so these they're real life like experiences. Obviously, it's not the outside world, it's in this cocoon of business school, but it's modeled to look just like the outside world. And so these conversations that may be difficult, you figure out, how do I navigate them? How do I motivate someone based on who they are? How do I reflect on what I could have done better? And it's really like a laboratory for this, whatever length of the program it is, to learn and grow and constantly reflect, and then go through that cycle again and again and again.
Craig, I still have tears in my eyes from the onion that you mentioned earlier, but I have held on to the idea of behavioral skills and shunted aside the soft skills. But as we think about teamwork, resilience, communication, it's also that sort of boots on the ground experience. And at Mendoza, the opportunity, they'll do field work. They'll go to Colombia and work with former FARC members. That must truly open their eyes to the different dynamics of a group.
Yeah, you've really done your homework. That's probably the program that we're most proud of, the Business on the Front Lines program. I want to start by echoing something that Gary said. I really like the metaphor of the laboratory. When we think about leadership, we very much do think about the time here as a laboratory. Another thing Gary said that sort of reminded me of this, my own research when I did my PhD, and what I study now is a form of leadership. It's strategic leadership. So we study CEOs, top management teams, and so on. And there's a lot of work suggesting the idea that the organization is a reflection of its top managers. So who you are as a leader is going to manifest, that strategy is a human construction. But we tend to give pretty short shrift to the idea that leadership can be developed. What is the emergence? And I think that's where business schools have kind of stepped in and said, well, we are going to try, and we're going to try by creating a laboratory. And I see it happening in many different ways. We can have it in programming. We see it in class. You're expected to take leadership roles fairly regularly there. There's experiential learning that we try to do here, Business on the Front Lines as an example. We do a program called Mods Away, which is where a half semester, a certain number of students, they'll go. There was one in Santiago, Chile this year. And so they take regular classes, they work with companies when they're there, work on real world projects. And each of those, the aim is to provide a fairly, a moderately stressful, but a safe environment where you can practice your leadership skills. And I think the experiential learning generally tends to be a good way of doing that. I think what's also nice when we think about the experiential learning components, business schools are good for something we don't always talk about, which is consumption. The economists call it consumption. It's just like having fun. As I was logging on here, I was looking at my emails, and the MBA association here tomorrow is having a Smash Brothers tournament. Now, I don't know what Smash Brothers is. I think it's a video game, but I know that they're taking over the two biggest rooms that we have in Mendoza, and they've got big screens. They're going to go at it. And this was just organized, obviously organically, through the MBA Association. And so we see leadership applied at something that almost seems trivial all the way up to something that truly can impact the world. And so I think what we try and do here, at least, and what I believe UCLA, Indiana, and many others would do, is provide those contexts and those environments where leadership can grow organically. So it's not saying you need to be a leader in this way. It's here's your sandpit. Go. What can you do to make us better? What can you do to make your colleagues better? And I like that very much about the nature of the program.
Well, after the panel, we encourage you to go back to the email, register, and then you can tell us exactly what tomorrow's event involves. So we talk about a laboratory, the sandpit, sort of this safe space that also then involves reflection, so that you can look back on your performance, have the review and feedback of others. And Rebecca, presumably, with all of the classes that are then, looking at discounted cash flow and double entry accounting, I'm not sure, you and your team have this constant dialogue with the students, thinking about the sort of skills that will serve them well for networking, for interviewing, for next steps in their career. So to talk through how you're then bringing them into that reality and providing them tools.
Right. So yes, we obviously we work with all the students from the career standpoint, but we're also in close contact with the MBA program office. And we have actually it's our second year, can be some part of something called the Leadership Academy, where they are learning about leadership, but then they're also testing and helping peer mentor their first years and go through a lot of different leadership training programs, whether sometimes it's actually outside overnight in some kind of crazy situations. But overall, what we do is we work all together and be able to receive feedback on students, whether we hear it or whether we hear it from companies or whether we hear it from classmates, and really be that person to walk through feedback and learning and opportunity with those students to say, okay, hey, I heard this. Talk to me about this. What happened here? What was the situation? How are you feeling? How would you address it next time? So really letting the students learn from different situations. I think, Gary, you mentioned that sometimes teams blow up or not, maybe not in quite so much words, but really use that as a learning opportunity, right? You're never going to love everybody you work with in the working environment. So how do you work with people who are different from you? And what can you take from that feedback? Maybe it's somehow something you've reacted to or something that they're reacting to, but how do you develop that communication style? How do you develop that empathy and really work together on those skill sets? And then that can then be translated into interviewing skills, into networking skills, because learning about different people, learning about different companies, really trying to find the right fit for that student.
Right. And presumably when they come back, Rebecca, from an internship, do you see a very different individual that with all of the preparation of that experience and then coming back and again reflecting on it, as Gary talked about earlier? Is there a distinct difference? Yes,
definitely. So the students come back and then hopefully they loved it, but there's lots of examples where they didn't. So, and maybe a reason why. And so then I think really sit with each of those students when they come back and say, okay, how was it? Let's talk about it. What did you like? What did you not like? Is this something you want to continue doing or not at this company or elsewhere? And really helping them grow from those situations. And I know it's been iterated before, but it's fascinating to watch that student who walks in as that first year to when they walk across the stage at graduation, and they truly are different people. It's some wonderful examples of some people who are extreme introverts who stayed an introvert, but then were out recruiting in a couple of years and doing some fascinating things that they never would have gotten there if they hadn't come through the MBA program and really learned a lot more about themselves and how they could put themselves out there and challenge themselves.
Right. Learning when you least expect it, Gary, was something that I took from the Anderson website. And if I put that within the framework of already Los Angeles, a gateway to the US, an incredibly cosmopolitan culture reflected at Anderson. So how does the MBA then help in that wider worldview, a global perspective? Or if a student's saying, do I really need to know the cultural values of Australia and Ireland, the reference to Craig, how does that international dimension play out?
Yeah, actually plays out day one. Our main auditorium, the only space where we can seat all of our students in one space, has all the international flags that represent the students that are in the program. And you can see 50, 60 flags sometimes. And that is a statement from the very beginning, no matter where you're from, whether you're in the United States or not in the United States, that this is truly a global experience. And I want to connect back to this other approach that I talked about, that when we have students in small groups break up to talk about all these different ranges of ways they identify, and it covers things like gender identity, sexual orientation, socioeconomic status, nationality, body size and type, ability status, as well as race and ethnicity. And so by having this dialogue, they realize that there's commonalities, but there's also differences. And we typically, we're trained as adults when we're children. We've all seen a child staring at something and a parent saying, stop staring at that thing. And that child just innocently trying to absorb difference, right? And so we try and break down that mindset that we typically are trained to do and say, move towards this difference in what is a safe space that they're creating, to understand more about it. And that's from a global perspective. That's from understanding the different dimensions of what drives economies in different parts of the world, to things like, race and ethnicity and the impact in different parts of the world or in the United States. And so what we find from this is that we have champions for things like, it's not just the women in our class that says that we'd like to increase the percentage of women. There's just as many men that are saying that as well too, because they know as diverse as you make this environment, the better it's going to be. And
right.
So it all feeds from having the skill set of, again, understanding these different dimensions of difference. And certainly the global and international piece is one important part of it. But as you kind of master each one of those explorations, it makes the next one easier and easier and easier. And I think that's a critical part in terms of the human development and ultimately leadership development as individuals go back out into the world of work.
Yeah. So as we all bring our cultural backgrounds, whether you've had any success explaining Aussie rules football or even Gaelic football, Craig, but there is Notre Dame football. And that would speak perhaps to the alumni network that Notre Dame is well known for. You're perhaps mindful at the front of the classroom as a professor of all of the learning that is taking place laterally, between students. What do you witness?
Yeah, it's exactly right. And you're right about all of that, and that nobody's that interested in Aussie rules, but I try and I bring it in. Or hurling, they find especially interesting. My favorite line that I got in the entire time I was in Ireland is hurling is a cross between hockey and murder. I thought, okay, that's a beautiful description of a sport, but I digress. But yeah, the learning that goes on in classrooms, I think it's critical, and that's not from the professor to the students, that's across student. I go back to my own MBA, I certainly experienced that. You hear it so often that it's a truism, but there's a reason for this, is that you learn as much or more from your colleagues in the MBA as you do from the program itself, from the faculty. And an integral part of that is differences in national background, differences in culture, differences in ethnicity. And it's, we can never truly put ourselves in the shoes of another. We can never truly understand their situation, but we got to try. And as managers, we need to be able to manage those who are different to ourselves. Sometimes we're going to have people reporting to us who have had different cultural backgrounds, who continue to. We're going to be managing teams that are comprised of those who are different to us. That's not going away. That's going to increase in intensity over the years. And so if you are going to be an effective manager, if you're going to be an effective leader, an effective CEO, then as soon as possible, you need to be grounded in this idea. I think it's an example of something that I would go back to with the MBA, that the MBA is good at getting you comfortable with discomfort. We gain a great deal from diversity, but it's natural. That people are not like us, so we don't. It's homophily works against us, but we know that this is important, and this is what we learn from. And so the MBA helps you at the geographic level and otherwise to be comfortable with that to a greater degree, and then you learn from that. You learn from each other. So I find that a very valuable element of the entire environment.
And those sort of qualities, Rebecca, they have a very long shelf life. I mean, you went yourself, we talked about being an MBA, over 20 years ago, and both for, students as they think about perhaps their first position coming out of business school, but you must see where the skills that they've developed are playing out 5 years, 10 years. Are you always reminding them, that this is something you'll be able to go back to, perhaps your own experience, things that you've been able to go back to from the Kelley MBA?
Definitely. I actually just had a call with an alum earlier this week, and she was she's kind of in the process of, she's staying at her same company, but looking at different opportunities. And she called to ask for advice. And I just reminded her a couple of things. She's like, oh, so it just really goes back to the original of networking and kind of connecting with people. And, but it does. It's the same skill sets. It's like we're teaching you skill sets for life, right? It's you will take what you learned in your MBA, you will continue to grow from that, and you'll test it and you'll try it. And you're always welcome to come back and talk to us. And I think like pretty much everybody has alumni career services for life. And so, and those students use it, and they should, because it's like, there's always somebody else to bounce ideas off of, or to rethink about things maybe in a slightly different way. But the skill sets gained from an MBA definitely are always valuable. Like you mentioned, I'm an MBA from a long time ago, and I'll say my first career was actually investment management, and made a ton of connections through that way. But stay in touch with all my classmates, and I still bounce ideas off of them and connect with them, and they're all over the world. And it's fun, because it's like, oh, what do you think about this? Or remember when we did this? And it's a wonderful environment and a connection with people, whether it's your class, the class above you, the class below you, that you will maintain forever.
Right. And presumably what Craig was describing of, individuals in the classroom and learning in these different directions, but also that's over years, if not decades, because you can connect them with graduates that are 10, 15, 20, whether in investment management or other fields. And there's the dialogue to develop there too. Definitely.
And actually earlier today, I was connecting some of our undergrads to some of our MBA alums in certain areas. And yeah, I mean, it's building that connection, and your alumni understand what you go through within the MBA program, like you will understand that future people will go through, and you all are connected because of that. It's become essentially a large family, and always willing to give advice, always willing to connect. And I think that's true of any of our schools. It's, you become part of this group that's a special group, and memories share with that, but also skill sets and learnings. And you can always leverage that going forward as you change careers.
Right. It must be a lovely moment, Gary, hosting 5-year, 10-year, 20-year alumni reunions. When you overhear them talking to one another, and they're, commenting on changes on the campus, but what are the sort of things that you hear as they reflect on how they grew as a person, looking back 10, 20 years?
Yeah, the thing that is terrific when you go to these reunions are that it's really the last time in most of these alumni's lives that they've built a set of lifelong friends. And so the community goes well beyond, their 2 or, however long they're getting their MBA, it's 2 years in a full-time MBA program. And many times it's clusters. It's clusters of people that have stayed in touch, and they've done all these events by their own, travel the world. And the clusters are reconnecting with each other and sharing those stories that they've worked and we either work together or have done some amazing trip somewhere across the globe. So it's a reconnect in some ways, but it's sharing clusters of stories because we find that our students stay engaged. The thing that's also impressive is the things that they've achieved, and some through this network that they've been a part of since they started business school. The things they've achieved sometimes, to Rebecca's point, they've networked with each other to move into new roles. They've created this instant peer group as they progressed up their careers. So it covers a whole host of things. Of sometimes there's, networks or business deals that can be formed from these alumni sessions, but also it's just, when are we going to do our next thing after this event? And what's neat about it is you typically by class, so you have those clusters in their years and cross years too, in overlapping, years of programming. So it's really nice to see the combination. I always say that an MBA provides this amazing social network that's an umbrella, and the umbrella underneath that is this amazing professional network. And so people are using it on a regular basis, but the alumni events is a great compilation of all these different clusters to reconnect and tell these stories of what they've done since business school.
Yeah. So all of your schools, we talked earlier on about the financial ROI. It's proven year after year and continues to then provide a return in the many, many years that follow. Craig, whether you were sitting down with a niece or a nephew, or just any young professional, perhaps thinking about business school, but wanted to maybe share one aspect that you either feel is overlooked or that cannot be overemphasized, what would that be?
It's a good question. Without wishing to reiterate too much of what has been said here, I think Rebecca's examples illustrate this, and what Carrie was just saying illustrates this. It's very rare that you would have the opportunity in your life to become embedded in a network that is both so successful, so supportive, and so diverse. We tend to gravitate toward those who are similar to us on many different dimensions. There's benefits there and drawbacks, but it means that you tend to have a sort of a closed network in a lot of different places. Maybe it's related to a sport or related to an activity. The MBA, because the way it's designed, and because we use the visible hand a little bit when we're putting people together, we sort of direct them toward building these relationships with individuals that they wouldn't have otherwise. And then they see the benefit for that for years, and I'd say decades to come. The examples that have been said today are really good. My own version of that happened a couple of months ago. A professor of mine from the MBA, I hosted him here at Notre Dame, and that was great. And he's still doing really well. And we sort of very loosely keep in touch. We're on LinkedIn together and the odd email. But we felt that we built enough of a relationship that he was comfortable looking me up when he was over in the US. And I took him to a football game, and we had a beer or two. And I think that's one example of the hundreds of different interactions and experiences that you're likely to have. And there really is something that's distinct about the MBA for that. I think you get a version of this with good alumni networks from good schools, with many programs. But the eclecticism, I think, of the MBA is something that we all as administrators, we work very hard to do. I think that enhances the strength of the social network and then the professional network.
Right. Rebecca, on your LinkedIn profile, it talks about, it's a very happy description, having fun, but you talk about being busy. But busy in the sense, you love to be busy, a real sense of purpose. I noted your membership of an organization called Drive. And when we think about whether it's young women thinking about business school or any individual, they say, yeah, I just don't see it on my path. Again, what would your advice be to anybody to imagine taking that next step?
I think it's really thinking about what you want to be. It's interesting from my perspective because I work with undergrads and then I work with all of our grad students, and sitting with a 18, 19, 20, 21-year-old is different because they're like, well, I'm going into my first job and I think this is what I want to do. And then you flip that to the MBA side, and those people all had done that, thought they wanted to do whatever it was, and now are rethinking that several years later. So it's, I think if you're thinking from an undergrad perspective, go out and try something, get some experience, try to figure out what it is that you really are drawn to. But the MBA to me it's something where you can reset, you can change. And it's a skill set that you will use no matter what you do in your life. It's whether that's in a true business career, it could be a nonprofit career, it could be honestly anything, startup. But it's more of a space where it's time to reset. It's time to build the network. It's time to learn some skill sets that maybe you didn't learn in undergrad, or even if you went to a business school, it's a different level of skill sets. It's different leadership. So to me, it's something I think most people should probably consider at some point, whether they choose to do it or not. But it's really something that I think pretty much anybody who's gotten an MBA will come back and say they don't regret it. I mean, I look back and say it was probably 2 of the best years of my life on lots of different levels, but it really was a life-changing experience, and it really opened so many opportunities that I wouldn't have gotten otherwise.
We've talked a lot about the personal journey, and just a final thought, Gary, and a statement around we share success. The idea that it's your journey, but you are sharing it with your classmates. You're part of this bigger tribe, this bigger community. And we is something that's going to accompany through the 2 years, the highs and the lows, and the years to follow. Why is it so important, we sharing success?
Yeah, it's a great question. I think because, we're bringing in all these talented, competitive people from all over the world. And there's the risk of it being an internally competitive environment. And really, from day one, when we talk about drive change, think fearlessly, and share success, we want people to be externally competitive, but internally collaborative. The way we're going to make these differences is by working in teams together. And it extends to even the career search. People will pair up and partner, and even if they're going for the same job, because they know ultimately the best people are going to get those roles in from Anderson. And they want to share in that success of everyone being successful, not just an individual being successful. So it is this power of we. And it's great. I think it starts with our admissions process, that we just bring in a collection of students that truly think that way, buy into that culture. And by creating that day one, it kind of stays throughout the program. The second years provide leadership to first years in terms of understanding how this community works. So it becomes a very powerful thing.
At the end of day one of the Center Court MBA Festival, I went onto my LinkedIn account and I just wrote, I love these events. I think it was written in capital letters. And then the first session today, David from London Business School talked about, he described them as type A listeners, high achievers, very smart individuals, but also had that ability to listen to others. And I did just want to hold up that mirror to the three of you, because sometimes panels can be not dysfunctional, but that there isn't a connection. And the way that all three of you listened to each other, how you then picked up on or shared or echoed some of those comments is really striking. I'm sure it says something about your three institutions and this sense of empathy, collaboration, bringing the best out of everybody. So Craig, Rebecca, and Gary, my thanks to you for being these wonderful listeners, but also so very insightful and thoughtful. I really enjoyed the session together.
Thank you very much, Matt. I know I felt the same connection at the panel, and I believe that you're directly attributable to that. You have done, outstanding background homework for this. You've learned things about me that my wife doesn't know. And I think you did a wonderful job tying that together. I don't want to speak for my panelists, but I feel they would agree.
I think that was well said, Craig. I totally agree.
Yeah, definitely.
Very kind.
Thank you, man.
Thanks all three of you.
Thank you.